everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is MTG Ghouldude, and today we're going to be covering Eldrazis, the big scary monsters in the Blind Eternities that we all know and love. So, I took a poll in my community section on the channel, and I seen that, very few actually cared for it, but I kind of wanted to do it because it's kind of a relative topic, and because I have my own Eldrazi deck, and I didn't even realize some of these were viable options. It's not really that great of a tribe to just build a whole deck around, but it's a fun tribe because it always turns heads. So, we're going to start all the way back in World Wake. World Wake released in January of 2010. All the way back in 2010, in the teens. Ooh, that takes me back a little bit. So, we're going to start off in Wooburg order, starting with colorless, because, most of your Eldrazis are colorless anyway. Starting off with the Ulamog's Crusher for 8 mana. It's an 8/8 with Annihilator 2 and attacks each turn if able. Hand of Emrakul for 9 generic mana. It's a 7/7. You may sacrifice 4 Eldrazi spawn rather than pay Hand of Emrakul's mana cost. And it has Annihilator 1, so it's not that bad. Artisan of Kozilek for 9 generic mana. It's a 10/9. Whenever you cast Artisan of Kozilek, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it also has Annihilator 2. This is the one that I feel like has seen the most play throughout the years, regardless, because it's a reanimator card, even though it's super expensive. But if you can bring it back for cheap, it's not as good unless you can cast it. Pathrazer of Ulamog for 11 generic. It's a 9/9 with Annihilator 3, and it can be blocked except for by 3 or more creatures, so it has whatever triple menace is, which is not that bad. Spawn Sire of Ulamog for 10 generic mana. It's a 7/11. It has Annihilator 1, and for 4, it has 2 abilities. For 4 generic mana, you can put 2 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens onto the battlefield. And they have the ability to sacrifice this creature, add 1 generic mana to your mana pool, and for 20 generic, you can cast any number of Eldrazi cards you own from outside the game without paying their mana costs. Now, that would have to include, like a wish board or something like that. So usually this card doesn't see play, but for the mana production later on, if you're just throwing mana away and not using it, you could throw it into this and have spawns to start working on the field. It That Betrays. Now, this is another one of those that has seen play throughout the years. For 12 generic mana, it's an 11/11 with Annihilator 2. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, put that card onto the battlefield under your control. I think that's really good. And I love the flavor text. Your pleas for death shall go unheard. And this is where we start getting our first looks of the Titans. This is Kozilek, Butcher of Truth for 10 generic mana. It's a 12/12. Whenever you cast it, draw 4 cards. It has Annihilator 4. And when it is put into a graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles his or her graveyard into their library. So this is the start of the cycle of Titans. Ulamog, the Infinite Gyre for 11 generic. It's a 10/10, which is a little bit smaller than their bigger brother. Whenever you cast it, destroy target permanent. It has Annihilator 4. It is also indestructible. Did he have indestructible? No, Kozilek is not indestructible. This was really strange. Ulamog is put into a graveyard. It has the Titan effect. Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn, currently banned in almost everything it's legal in, or could be played in. For 15 generic, it's a 15/15, and it can't be countered. Whenever you cast Emrakul, take an extra turn after this one. Flying protection from colored spells, and Annihilator 6. And it has the Titan clause of shuffle your graveyard. Skittering Invasion for 7 generic. You put 5/0/1. It's a tribal sorcery Eldrazi. So if it says you can look for an Eldrazi, you can go looking for this. You put 5/0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens with Sacrifice this creature, add 1 mana to generic. Add 1 generic mana to your mana pool. It's pretty good if you're looking to build a big spawn deck. Not of this world, not recently. Got a reprint, so it's gone down in price a little bit. For 7 generic mana, you have another tribal instant. It says counter target spell or ability that targets a permanent you control, and if not of this world, costs 7 less to cast if it targets a spell or ability that targets a creature you control with 7 power or greater. So that's pretty good. Eldrazis Conscription, tribal enchantment for 8 generic mana. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +10/+10 and has trample and annihilator. All is dust. For 7 generic mana, it's your favorite colorless tribal Eldrazi sorcery. Each player sacrifices all colored permanents he or she controls. This also goes great in a colorless Phyrexian deck or any artifact, name an artifact deck. Dread Drone for 4 and a black. It's a 4/1. When it enters the battlefield, make 2 Eldrazi spawn creature tokens. Emrakul's Hatcher for 4 and a red. It's a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, make 3 0/1 Eldrazi spawns. Rapacious One, I believe that's how it says. For 5 and a red, it has trample. It's an Eldrazi drone that's a 5/4, and when it deals a combat damage to a player, put that many 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens onto the battlefield. Nest Invader for 1 and a green. It's a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, make a spawn. Kozilek's Predator for 3 and a green. It's a 3/3 Eldrazi drone. When it enters the battlefield, make 2 Eldrazi spawn creature tokens, and they have sacrifice this creature. Brood Warden for 3 and 2 green. It's a 4/4. I didn't know this card existed. It gives all Eldrazi spawn creatures you control +2/+1. That's like, it makes them a 2/2. Makes them viable. This is definitely on my to get list later. And then we move into Rise of the Eldrazi. Later on in... That wasn't 2010. I must have been looking at a different one. That was around 2015. I think so. Yeah, because was not too long started into Magic, not too long after these 2 sets had dropped. Kozilek's Chandler for 5 generic. It's a 4/4, and you can tap it to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Ruin Processor, and I just love this art. It screams zombie, but it's definitely not. For 7 generic, it's a 7/8. When you cast Ruin Processor, you may put a card an opponent owns from exile into that player's graveyard. If you do, you gain 5 life. So this is where we start seeing the what is it called? The ingest ability before it was actually named. We see the processes of what it fuels later on. So Eldrazi Ruin Processor is a outlet for those exile cards. Eldrazi Devastator for 8 generic. It's an 8/9 with trample. Deathless Behemoth for 6 generic. It's a 6/6. It has vigilance, which I don't know why you need a 6/6 for 6 with vigilance, but there you go. Sacrifice 2 Eldrazi Scions, and these are Scions. These are, I believe, 1/1 Scions and not 0/1 spawns. So good to remember. Return it from your graveyard to your hand. You can only activate this ability anytime you could cast a sorcery. Ulamog's Despoiler for 6 generic. It's a 5/5. As it enters the battlefield, you may put 2 cards from your opponent's own from exile into their owner's graveyards. If you do, it gets 4 +1/+1 counters when it enters the battlefield, which is not bad. It's actually pretty good. Bane of Balaged. For 7 generic, it's a 7/5. Whenever it attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents he or she controls. So this is pretty much soft Annihilator, pretty much. Breaker of Armies for 8 generic mana. It's a 10/8. And all creatures able to block breaker of armies do so. Yeah, that's pretty good. Especially if you can find a way to make sure that it's not going to die. Perfect. Blight Herder for 5 generic. It's a 4/5 Eldrazi processor. I don't think we've seen a lot any more processors in Magic since Eldrazi's. But when you cast Blight Herder, you may put 2 cards your opponents own from exile into their owner's graveyards. If you do, create 3/1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens onto the battlefield. Conduit of Ruin. Now, I'm looking at this art for the first time in a while, and to me it looks like there is a thing inside of a thing. Like if you look at its chest, it looks like there's another Eldrazi in there. That just may be me looking at it after not seeing it for so long. But yeah, it might be a known thing, but this is just what I see. For 6 generic mana, it's a 5/5. When you cast it, you may search your library for a colorless creature card with converted mana cost 7 or greater, reveal it, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. The first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast. This is really good in an Eldrazi deck. Or in a colorless creature deck, just saying. Endless One. It's an X cost 0/0 Eldrazi, but when it enters the battlefield, whatever you paid into X, that's how many counters it gets. Which, if you're in a proliferate deck, this can be really good. Start it out on 1 and just watch it grow. Desolation Twin for 10 mana. It is a 10/10, and whenever you cast it, put a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token onto the battlefield. Pretty dope. Oblivion Sower. For 6 generic, it's a 5/8. Whenever you cast Oblivion Sower, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of his or her library. Then you may put any number of land cards that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. So you could actually probably put this in a landfall deck and try and do better than your opponents if they're playing landfall decks. Just not an idea. Void Winnower. Yep, Mr. I Can't Even. For 9 mana, it's an 11/9. Your opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana cost, and 0 is even, so they can't do anything that free casts a spell. Pretty much, they can't just what is it? No, because that doesn't cheat around the mana cost. Never mind. Your opponents can't block with creatures with even converted mana cost, and 0 is even, so they can't block with tokens. And here we see Ulamog again return in Battle for Zendikar. Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, this time. For 10 mana, he's a 10/10, so he's squared up nice and good. And whenever you cast him, exile 2 target permanents. So this is like an immediate annihilator. It has indestructible. When it attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of his or her library. That is just back-breaking, especially when in Modern, when you're playing this or something like that. Whatever they play him in, it's back-breaking. Salvage Drone for 1 blue. Now we're starting to get into our colored ones. This is where we start seeing Ingest. And Ingest is whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles top card of his or her library. It doesn't matter if it has, 17 power. You only ingest 1. But it's Salvage Drone for 1 blue. It's a 1/1 with Devoid, so it has no color, even though it has color identity from the blue. When it dies, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So it's a loot effect. Mist Intruder for 1 and a blue. It's a 1/2 with flying and ingest. It's an Eldrazi drone. Benthic Infiltrator for 2 and a blue. It's a 1/4 Eldrazi drone with Devoid ingest and can't be blocked. So that's actually a good, if you're going to throw some kind of poison or infect thing on it, that's pretty good. Eldrazi Sky Spawner for 2 and a blue. It's a 2/1 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield. Now, I'm not gonna lie. Just the way this card reads to me, this could totally make. This could be. I would actually pay an extra mana, so it could be 2 and 2 blue for a 2/1, and it gives your Eldrazi flying, or it even gives your Scions flying. I think that would have been really dope. Incubator Drone. For 3 and a blue, it's a 2/3. And when it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield. Merc Strider. For 3 and a blue, it's a 3/2 Eldrazi Processor. When it enters the battlefield, you may put a card an opponent owns from exile into their graveyard. If you do, return target creature to its owner's hand. So it's like a flicker. It's like a bounce. They don't get it no more. And this is, I don't know why, but I just feel I love this card for the art, because it just seems like this Eldrazi is so at peace. It's just sitting there. It looks like its tentacles are crossed, like it's sitting like a human and its legs are crossed. I don't know, but it just looks like it's just it's playing with the water. It just got done dealing with these humans that were trying to mess with it, and it's just chilling. I love this art. But let's talk about it a little bit. Oracle of Dust. For 4 and a blue, it's an Eldrazi Processor with 3 power and 5 toughness. For 2 generic mana, you can put a card an opponent owns from exile into their graveyard. You draw a card, then discard a card. So that is a good going rate if you can keep constantly exiling creatures from your opponent's graveyards. Or from your opponent's. Tide Drifter. For 1 and a blue, this is a 0/5. Other colorless creatures you control get +0/+1. This is where we start seeing the buffs. These are the ones I should have looked for whenever I built my Eldrazi deck, but I didn't. So I was like, oh, it's fine. I don't think I need it. Yeah, I should have put more low mana cost creatures in the deck to fill it out. Ruination Guide for 2 and a blue. It's a 3/2 with ingest. Other colorless creatures you control get +1/+0. So this would actually work in a artifact deck if they're all artifacts, no color identity. Cryptic Cruiser for 3 and a blue. It's a 3/3 Eldrazi Processor with Devoid. For 2 and a blue, it has the ability to put a card an opponent owns from exile into their graveyard. Tap target creature. See, this is one of those ones that I didn't know about it, but I'm kind of like, I'm kind of glad I didn't know about it, because it's not as good. Ulamog's Reclaimer. For 4 and a blue, it's a 2/5 Eldrazi Processor. It has Devoid, and when it enters the battlefield, you may put a card an opponent owns from exile into their graveyard. If you do, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. That's another card I didn't know I needed. It's pretty good, especially if you can keep bringing this back and you just keep getting your good spells back. Super good. Drowner of Hope. For 5 and a blue, it's a 5/5. Whenever it has Devoid, and whenever it enters the battlefield, make 2 1/1 Scions. And you can sacrifice a Scion to tap target creature. That's actually pretty cool. Sludge Crawler. For 1 black, it's a 1/1 with ingest, and for 2 colorless, it gets +1/+1 to end a turn. Culling Drone. For 1 and a black, it's a 2/2 Eldrazi Drone. It has Devoid and ingest. That's it. Mind Raker. For 3 and a black, it's a 3/3 with Eldrazi Processor. I wonder what the difference between a drone, a processor, and just an Eldrazi is. I'm guessing a processor like helps the production of Eldrazi, and drones go out and scout. They're the more hardy, ready to take some damage if they need to types, I'm guessing. When Mindraker enters the battlefield, you may put a card an opponent owns from exile into their graveyard. If you do, each opponent discards a card. Silent Skimmer. For 3 and a black, it's a 0/4 with Devoid and Flying. Whenever it attacks, defending player loses 2 life. So it doesn't matter if they block it and kill it, they still lost 2. Skitter Skin. That's just weird to say. It does not roll off the tongue comfortably. For 3 and a black, it's a 4/3. It can't block, and it has Devoid. But it also has the ability for 1 and a black, you can regenerate it. But you can only do it if you control another colorless creature. Which I don't think you would. Wasteland Strangler. And this kind of puts me in the mind of the newer card that we got, the Flare of Loyalties, and what this design is. Kind of, sort of. But for 2 and a black, you get a 3/2 Eldrazi Processor. When it enters the battlefield, you may put a card from an opponent owns from exile into that player's graveyard. If you do, target creature gets -3/-3. Smothering Abomination. For 2 and 2 black, it's a 4/3. This is another one of those zombies that have stayed throughout the years, that had some buying power in decks. Especially around this time when, like, aristocrat decks were a lot stronger. But it has flying, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to sacrifice a creature. And yes, I said it like that because if you play aristocrat decks, this is not a downside, this is an upside. But whenever you sacrifice a creature, you draw a card. So that's why you want to play this in an aristocrat deck, so you can keep churning cards. Kozilek Sentinel for 1 and a red. It's a 1/4 with Devoid, and whenever you cast a colorless spell, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It is an Eldrazi drone. Nettle Drone for 2 and a red. It's a 3/1 with Devoid. Nettle Drone deals 1 damage to each opponent when you tap it. Whenever you cast a colorless spell, untap Nettle Drone. Which, there's a combo with this where you can tap it and constantly untap it and stuff like that. Vestige of Emrakul for 3 and a red. It's a 3/4 Eldrazi drone. Excuse me. With Devoid and Trample. 3/4 for 4 with Trample. Oh, how far power creep has come. Vile Aggregate. I kind of like this name. I just like it as a... That would be a cool, like, gameplay name. Like, if you're gonna make a deck, that'll be what you put it under. Vile Aggregate. But for 2 and a red, it's a star 5 Eldrazi drone. And its power is equal to the number of colorless creatures you control. It doesn't matter. It could be scions, it could be spawns. As long as you have colorless creatures, this thing's got some bite. And it has trample and ingest also. Barrage Tyrant. For 4 and a red, it's a 5/3 Eldrazi with Devoid. And for 2 and a red, you can sacrifice another colorless creature. It deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target player or creature. Oh, and that flavor text is so funny. Terrible Fury, excellent aim. I wonder how it's got good aim. I wonder how they see. Because it doesn't look like he has eyeballs, but he definitely looks like he knows where he's chunking that little Eldrazi dude. He really does. It's pretty cool art, though. It just looks like he's chunking a mini him. It'd have been cool if they'd have made the art and put like another one of him in that dude's hands, so they can like chunk one to chunk another one. It'd be pretty funny. Blister Pod for 1 green. It's a 1/1 with Devoid, Eldrazi drone. And whenever it dies, you make a 1/1 scion. Eyeless Watcher for 3 and a green. It's a 1/1 Eldrazi drone. When it enters the battlefield, make 2 1/1 colorless Eldrazi scion creature tokens. Void Attendant for 2 and a green. It's a 2/3 Eldrazi processor with Devoid. And for 1 and a green, you can put a card an opponent owns from exile into that player's graveyard. You put a 1/1 scion creature token onto the battlefield. So you can just constantly, if you're finding a way to exile creatures and everything. Like, would you be able to... Oh, I didn't even think about it like this. So you could play these cards. Use these cards. And have a Leyline of the Void in the deck. Or if you wanted to play white, which there's actually not a lot of white Eldrazi. There's like maybe one that we'll come across later. But you play this, Rest in Peace, exile the graveyards. You can start putting their cards back into their graveyard. Oh, wait a minute. Would it just be forever? Could you just, like, if a card would go into their graveyard, it goes back in exile? Ooh. I might need to work my deck around. I might need to do Abzan instead of Sultai. It would be a huge workaround, but man, that is value. I'd have to look that up. If you anybody, if you have an idea on the ruling of what that interaction would be with taking a card out of exile and putting it into the graveyard with Rest in Peace on the battlefield, let me know down in the comments below. This is getting a pretty long video though, so we need to move it along. Brood Monitor for 4 and 2 green. It's a 3/3. And whenever it enters, you make 3 1/1 scions. I still get them mixed up. Catacomb Sifter for 1, a black and a green. It's a 2/3. And when it enters the battlefield, put a scion onto the battlefield. That's not bad. Whenever another creature you control dies, though, you scry one, which is pretty cool. Herald of Kozilek for 1, a blue and a red. It's a 2/4 Eldrazi drone with Devoid, and colorless spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, which is pretty cool. I actually like the art on this one too. I like the color scheme of it. Ulamog's Nullifier for 2, a blue and a black. It's a 2/3 Eldrazi Processor with Devoid, Flash, and Flying. And whenever it enters the battlefield, you may put 2 cards an opponent owns from exile into their owner's graveyard. If you do, counter target spell. So if you can find a way to blink it in or something like that and put cards back in, it'd be pretty good. You could also probably do black, blue, white. Be pretty cool flicker ability stuff. Fathom Feeder for a blue and a black. It's a 1/1 with Death Touch and Ingest. And for 3, a blue and a black, draw a card. Each opponent exiles the top card of his or her library. Dust Stalker. For 2, a black and a red. It's a 5/3 Eldrazi with haste and Devoid. At the beginning of each end step, if you control no other colorless creatures, return this to your hand. Brood Butcher. For 3, a black and a green. It's a 3/3 with Devoid. When it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 Scion onto the battlefield. And for a black and a green, you can sacrifice a creature. Target creature gets a -2/-2 until end of turn. Sire of Stagnation. This is probably one of my favorite cards in the deck because it just causes so much of a ruckus. For 4, a black and a blue, it's a 5/7 Eldrazi with Devoid. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player exiles the top 2 cards of his or her library and you draw 2. It's pretty good, especially if you're playing against landfall decks. And now we move into January of 2016 when Oath of the Gatewatch dropped and gave us some more right after Rise of the Eldrazi. Warden of Geometries for 4 generic. It's a 2/3 Eldrazi drone with Vigilance. It's actually kind of important. But you can tap it to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, and that's when they start implementing the colorless mana symbols during this time. Kozilek's Pathfinder for 6 generic. It's a 5/5, and for a colorless, target creature can't block Pathfinder this turn. Walker of the Waste for 4 and a colorless. It's a 4/4 and it has trample, and it gets +1/+1 for each land you control named Waste. Which I find that is a flavor win because you would expect Eldrazis to get better if they're on their home turf. You know what I'm saying? And this has to be probably the ugliest creature that the Eldrazi have ever spawned. Eldrazi Mimic. For 2 generic mana, it's a 2/1. Whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may change Eldrazi Mimic's base power and toughness to that creature's base power and toughness to end a turn. And here we get into the ones that started wrecking Standard and eventually into Modern. Matter Reshaper for 2 and a colorless. It's a 3/2. When it dies, reveal the top card of your library. You may put that card onto the battlefield if it's a permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less. Otherwise, put it into your hand. Thought Knot Seer for 3 and a colorless. It's a 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it and exile that card. When it leaves, target opponent draws a card. Pretty cool. Reality Smasher for 4 and a colorless. It's a 5/5 with trample and haste. Ooh, not that bad of stats on that one. It's a 5 mana 5/5 with trample and haste. When it becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, counter that spell unless the controller discards a card. That's pretty good. Endbringer for 5 and a colorless. It's a 5/5. It untaps during each other player's untap step. So it also has 3 abilities for its 6 mana cost. You can tap it to deal a damage to target creature or player. You can tap a colorless and then tap it, and target creature can't attack or block this turn. Or you can use it for what I usually use it for and tap a Soul Ring, tap it and draw a card. Deceiver of Form for 6 and a colorless. It's an 8/8. At the beginning of combat on your turn, reveal the top card of your library. If a creature card is revealed this way, you may have creatures you control other than Deceiver of Form become copies of that card until end of turn. Oh, you may put that card at the bottom of your library. You may. So you can leave it up there, and if you have a top, you can just keep putting it back on top of your library, which is really good. And here we see Kozilek make his big reappearance again on Zendikar. Kozilek the Great Distortion for 8 and 2 generic mana. It's a 12/12. Whenever you cast him, or them, if you have fewer than 7 cards in hand, draw cards equal to the difference. It also has Menace. And it also has a counterspell ability as long as you discard a card with the same mana cost as the card you're trying to counter. Eldrazi Displacer, and this is where we get into the Eldrazi winner creatures. For 2 and a white, it's a 3/3 with Devoid. And for 2 and a colorless, you can exile another target creature and return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. That's pretty good. Blinding Drone. For 1 and a blue, it's a 1/3. It has Devoid. It's an Eldrazi drone. You can tap a colorless and tap it. Tap target creature. Cultivator Drone for 2 and a blue. It's a 2/3 Eldrazi drone. You can tap it to add a colorless to your mana. You can only spend it to cast a color spell, activate an ability of a colorless permanent, or pay cost that contains colorless. So it's kind of like an Eldrazi Power Stone, pretty much. Gravity Negator for 3 and a blue. It's a 2/3 with Devoid and flying. It's an Eldrazi drone. Whenever Gravity Negator attacks, you may pay a colorless. If you do, another target creature you control gains flying until end of turn. Oh no, you can do it to any creature. If you do, another target creature gains flying. Wow, that's pretty dope. That's pretty silly. Prophet of Distortion for a single blue. It's a 1/2 with Devoid. And for 4 generic mana, you can draw a card. Thought Harvester for 3 and a blue. It's a 2/4 with flying and Devoid. Eldrazi drone. Whenever you cast a color spell, target opponent exiles the top card of his or her library. So that could get really interesting and good. Dimensional Infiltrator. And I don't know. I can't understand what this art is. Like, for a while, I thought he was like underwater. But now that I look at it again, he's above. He looks like he's above land. He's like floating above the surface, but he's causing a distortion in the art. Like the columns don't look like they're, or the walls are shifting as he passes around them. For 1 and a blue, it is a 2/1 with flying and flash, and for 2 generic mana, target opponent exiles the top card of their library, and you may return it to its owner's hand. That's pretty good. Deep Fathom Skulker. For 5 and a blue, it's a 4/4, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. So if you're looking for a more creature-based way to use the Bite and a Thassa, here you go. Because this also gives you the ability for 3 and a Wingding or a colorless mana. So 4 generic. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. Sky Scourer. For 1 and a black, it's a 1/2 with flying and devoid. Whenever you cast a colorless spell, it gets +1/+0. Slaughter Drone. For 1 and a black, it's a 2/2 with devoid. And for a colorless mana, it gains Death Touch until end of turn. It's pretty useful. Kozilek Shrieker. For 2 and a black, it's a 3/2. And with a colorless mana, it gets +1/+0 and menace until end of turn. And you could just keep activating that ability to make it bigger and bigger. Kozilek's Translator. For 4 and a black, it's a 3/5. And you can pay 1 life to add 1 colorless to your mana pool. I didn't know this card existed. I probably have a mess of these in my collection, but I just didn't know. And the art is gorgeous, especially by that bismuth infecting whatever that is, the water, I'm guessing. But it's still pretty cool though. And I just never thought about this card. Pay a life, get a colorless mana. That's almost better than Treasonous Ogre, where you have to pay 3 for 1 red. Especially nowadays when you have like not the orrery. It's the artifact that says you can pay colorless mana as though it were colored mana, pretty much. You could just pay whatever you need to pay. Reaver Drone. For 1 black, it's a 2/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life unless you control another colorless creature. Essence Depleter. For 2 and a black, it's a 2/3 with devoid. It's an Eldrazi drone. And for 1 colorless and a Wingding, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Havoc Sower. For 3 and a black, it's a 3/3. Eldrazi drone with devoid, and for 2 colorless, Havoc Sower gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So it becomes a 3/3, then it becomes a 5/4. Yeah, 5/4, etc., etc. Bearer of Silence. For 1 and a black, it's a 2/1. Whenever you cast Bearer of Silence, you may pay 1 and a colorless. If you do, target opponent sacrifices a creature. It also has flying and can't block. Sifter of Skulls. And at first, I thought when I heard the card name, I thought it was, oh, he's sifting through people's skulls. No. By the art, in my opinion, it looks like he's sifting through Eldrazis skulls, like their faceplates and stuff. But for 3 and a black, you get a 4/3 Eldrazi with devoid, and whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion onto the battlefield. Dread Defiler. For 6 and a black, it's a 6/8 with devoid. And for 4 colorless mana, you can exile a creature card from your graveyard. Target opponent loses life equal to the exiled card's power. So that's actually pretty cool. Inverter of Truth. This is the boogeyman at one point in time of the meta, the modern meta. For 2 and 2 black, it's a 6/6 with devoid and flying. When it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from your library face down and then shuffle all cards from your graveyard into your library. Which could be pretty good if you're looking to try and maybe bring those back later. Or just you don't have anything good and it's all in your graveyard already. Eldrazi Aggressor. For 2 and a red, it's a 2/3 with devoid, Eldrazi drone. And it has haste as long as you control another colorless creature. Maw of Kozilek. For 3 and a red, it's a 2/5 with devoid, Eldrazi drone. It looks like teeth in the front of it, on the front of the body. Looks like he's got teeth. But for colorless, it gets +2, -2 until end of turn. Immobilizer Eldrazi. For 1 and a red, it's a 2/1 Eldrazi drone with devoid. But for 3 colorless, each creature with toughness greater than its power can't block this turn. Wow. So walls can't block. Pretty good. Eldrazi Obligator for 2 and a red. It's a 3/1. Whenever you cast it, you may pay 2 colors. If you do, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. And this creature has haste. Stalking Drone for 1 and a green. It's a 2/2 Eldrazi Drone. And for a colorless, it gets +1/+2 until end of turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. Pretty cool. Scion Summoner for 2 and a green. It's a 2/2 Eldrazi Drone. When it enters, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield. It has sacrificed this creature, add a colorless 2 mana pool. Birthing Hulk for 6 and a green. It's a 5/4 with Devoid Eldrazi Drone. It enters the battlefield, put 2 Scions onto the battlefield, and for 2 colorless, you can regenerate him whenever he enters the battlefield. So you can... Hold on. Okay, regenerate doesn't kill it. It doesn't, like, come back from the graveyard. It's a replacement effect. Okay. Vile Redeemer for 2 and a green. It's a 3/3 with flash. And whenever you cast Vile Redeemer, you may pay a colorless. If you do, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Sound creature token onto the battlefield for each non-creature token that died under your control this turn. World Breaker for 6 and a green. It's a 5/7 with Devoid. And whenever you cast World Breaker, exile target artifact, enchantment, or land. But with Harmonicon, you can do both. You can do 2 of them. It has reach, and for 2 and a colorless, sacrifice a land, return it from your graveyard to your hand. Flare Drone for 1, a black and a red. It's a 3/1 Eldrazi Drone with first strike and Devoid. Whenever a colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, target opponent loses 1 life. So if you could find a way to pseudo board wipe and make more spawns, you can keep this alive and just start pinging your opponents to death. Mind Melter for 1, a blue and a black. It can't be blocked. It's an Eldrazi Drone. It's a 2/2. And for 4 colorless, target opponent exiles a card from his or her hand. Activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. These. So if you have like infinite colorless mana, you can just make them discard their whole hand. Or exile their whole hand. Void Grafter for 1, a green and a blue. I don't know why they put the green before the blue, but whatever. It's a 2/4 Eldrazi Drone with flash and Devoid. Whenever it enters the battlefield, another target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. That could be good in just about any deck. But I actually have this in my Muldrotha deck because, you know, you never know when you need a... no, don't touch that. And now we get into, as of this year, which is 2023, Commander Masters. They have brought us 2 new cards in the Commander decks, along with some fantastic new art for some of the older cards. But to start it out, we're going to see Flare of Loyalties for 8 colorless and 2 more colorless. It's a 10/10 Eldrazi. And whenever you cast the spell, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature until end of turn. It has base power and toughness 10/10 and gains trample, Annihilator 2, and haste. And this also has Annihilator 2 and trample. Just no haste. But if you're playing red, you totally give it haste. Zuludok the Void Gorger for 5 and a colorless. It's a 7/4 legendary creature Eldrazi. So I don't know if we would consider this among the Titans, because the Titans are huge. They're big, nasty creatures. But I would consider this a Titan because of its ability. It's just making more problems. Just like the Titans do. But it says, colorless spells you cast from your hand with mana value 7 or greater have Cascade. And I thought they went a good ways with Apex Devastator. No, they had to do it with Eldrazi too. Ew. But that is going to be it for today. I know this was kind of a long one. Part 2 should be a little bit shorter because it will only be covering pretty much just one set, and that will be Eldritch Moon, where we see them appear again. I kind of wanted to keep this one from being an hour video, even though it's already 45 minutes in. But I appreciate everybody that has stuck with me through the channel, all the subscribers. All you guys are awesome. I really appreciate you. Everybody that leaves a comment, that shares the videos, it really means a lot to me, guys. But that is going to be it for today, and I'll see you guys next time in the graveyard.